Hey, welcome to another episode of When Bad Things Happen to Good People. My name's Todd Sullivan. With me today is special guest Carlo Sia.
Hey, everyone.
And today we're talking about a book called This Book is Anti-Racist.
And it's very appropriately named.
That's true.
I keep telling people when I'm telling them about this podcast that I'm going to do with you and how I'm finally reading a book, I keep calling it This Book is Not Racist because I keep forgetting the title. But, yeah. I mean, it's the same thing.
It's
right?
not, though.
Well,
it's not.
I guess, yeah. The book isn't racist.
It's not. That's true.
But it's also anti-racist.
Not racist.
Yes.
Like, not racist is just the absence of racism.
True, I guess.
This book is actively anti-racist. Yeah. It's actively pushing against racism. Apparently, that's a controversial thing. Apparently, what this book should be is just not racist. According to the Southlake, Texas school district. So, not to jump into it quite yet, because we need to have a moment to say, hey, how's it going? How are you? Thank you for coming.
You talking to me or our listeners? Oh, okay. I'm doing really well.
Show. We don't
I know. Yeah,
listeners are in the room on this podcast.
It's just you and me. All right, no one's gonna pop up behind us. I am doing well. Yeah, it's been a really good week. We're just coming off. This is a short week because we're just coming off of our Thanksgiving. Yeah. Yeah, so the week has been going by pretty quick, and I'm excited for the weekend to do not work stuff.
That's fine.
Yeah.
I always like that.
Yeah. How are you doing?
Pretty well. Glad to be back to covering a book on this podcast. We've done books for a while, but they were all children's books, and now, of course...
Yeah, I was going to say over the summer
kind of a children's book, too, but it's probably a slightly demographic, this one.
Slightly older. It's still like an elementary.
Still, I mean, it was taken from a fourth grade classroom, so it is still sort of meant for younger people. But
so now, question, because I haven't actually looked into like where it's been banned.
Yeah,
is it currently banned? I'm assuming in Texas, because that's the story you sent me.
Yeah,
it is still.
Here's the situation, and there is a specific news story that inspired me to want to cover this book, and that comes out of Southlake, Texas, just in the last week. So by the time this is out, maybe 10 days, 2 weeks. Basically, what happened is a student in the fourth grade brought this book home. This book being the book, This Book is Anti-Racist by Tiffany Jewell. And they brought this book home, and their mother found the book and complained to the teacher that the book violated her family's morals and faith. The teacher apparently said, okay, well, we'll take the book out of the library or whatever. But apparently the mother was still troubled by how the teacher responded to the concerns and basically went and filed an official report against the teacher. So this teacher, whose name is Ricky Farah, went from being the teacher of the year last year to now having like an official written reprimand in her file over this book.
Wow.
Because somebody found I guess the ideas of being anti-racist to be against their morals and faith. I'm not sure which religion that would be that finds anti-racism against their morals and faith. But anyway, what this has led to is a kind of a sweeping mandate to the school board in this area that teachers have to look their books and decide whether they provide multiple perspectives and to discard books that present singular dominant narratives in such a way that it might be considered offensive. Which is to say that if you're going to have a book about how racism is bad, you also have to have a book about how racism maybe isn't bad.
Okay.
Or you just don't have either of those.
Just no books anymore
in order
in schools.
to maintain neutrality, because that's the thing. Is it's got to be balanced and neutral.
But now, like, you have to have separate books that are like canceling each other out, or the books you have to show both perspectives.
Either or, I think.
Okay.
So you either have a book that shows both perspectives in it.
I'm having troubles thinking of a way to present racism in, like, the other side of racism being in a positive light.
Yeah.
Maybe you can help me out. Does that exist? Is that a real thing?
I don't think I can help you out. Because
okay, all right.
It doesn't make any more sense to me.
So I'm not going crazy.
Which is a bit why I look at this mandate as a, what?
Yeah.
How do you do this? And I guess this part comes partly from a new Texas law that prohibits schools from teaching lessons that might make students feel, quote, discomfort, guilt, anguish, or any other form of psychological distress, unquote, because of their race. And I don't like the idea of making kids feel discomfort, guilt, anguish, or any other form of psychological distress. But I don't think the problem here is necessarily that. And more the problem is that, like, their ancestors that were white were shitheads.
Yeah.
And did awful things.
So my issue with that is, what is causing them more psychological distress and discomfort? Being bullied because of their race or whatever, and that's just how society has kept things going, and we just decide to not teach them a better way, or reading some things in a book and realizing that the way things are right now and the way things have been are not good, and we need to make a change. Like, I feel like kids right now are in such a weird place with, you add social media into the mix and people can kind of hide behind their keyboard, and you have a lot more of that racism and hate shining through. And you've got kids who have, like, depression and are cutting themselves and doing all this stuff because of what has come down from racism and the way that the system has been worked against them for in this book, she calls it the global majority. But everyone else considers them the minority. Mm-hmm. That's how society reflects or calls them. So I don't know. I would much rather children go through some discomfort while learning and educating and being educated in, I guess, a better future. How to be more of a better human being than have kids bullied because of something that, their parents and ancestors have kept going on, because it's less uncomfortable to not talk about this stuff, right?
Well, like, it's like the old, those who forget the past, et cetera, et cetera. I mean, they're asking that these kids not ever confront the past.
Yeah, but the people in the past didn't confront the past, and that's what created our future, right?
Yeah, right.
So what have we learned from that? Like, nothing. That's what,
but the other thing, too, though, is that so far in this case, this hasn't been an issue of a student feeling, uncomfortable. It's the parent.
Mm-hmm.
So, and in that case, again, this is probably a case where, one of the things this book, and we will talk more specifically about what's in the book in a minute, but this book really encourages people to look at their own lives and look at their own families, look at their own histories, both in how you've been affected by racism and how maybe you have been a participant in racism, either intentionally or institutionally or whatever. And that is something that a lot of people don't like addressing. They don't like, I see a lot of people on Facebook when it comes to talking about, First Nations issues and stuff, about how, like, well, I didn't do anything against them. It was my ancestors, so I'm fine. And that's valid. But I think you still have to look at where you're at right now is to some extent a result of that past racism.
Well, and she does mention something about that, like our history started way before we were even born. Like our history started with our grandparents' history and their grandparents' history, and how those generations raised each other, which then brought us to where we are now. So, the life you're living now was affected and influenced by the way that your parents were raised and their parents were raised. So yeah, we need to do something. Like, even if we make a change now and everything went perfect, like, it's still going to take generations to correct where we've made some mistakes along the path in creating these inequalities. Yeah. So I don't know, but she does touch on that in the book and mentions about, your history starts before you're even born, which was interesting. I like that part.
Yeah. But I think this is probably the case where it's the mother who didn't like the idea of having to confront the issues of like the fact that every cis white male, female in Canada and the US is living on land that was stolen. Right? People don't like to think about that. More than likely, this is a mother that didn't want her son, and through that herself. And I am probably putting some words in her head, but that's just the way it feels. Like this was her reaction to the book of, we don't want to explore these ideas, so let's get this out of the library.
Now, does it say in that article whether the parent actually read the book or just skimmed through the beginning part?
I'm not clear on whether she read the whole book or just sort of skimmed it or what the case was. Okay. Again, in most of these cases, I find that it's very knee-jerk. It's very much like you might read one sentence and be like, oh, they're calling my son a racist, so we need to get this book out of the library. But it has led to the teachers basically shutting down their libraries right now. They've got they've put blankets over them. They've got
like a do not cross or whatever. Right.
And like all the libraries are basically closed down right now until they can go through and literally vet every single book as far as whether it's got a neutral stance or not, in order to prevent any more parents or kids from becoming uncomfortable.
Which it blows my mind. Wow. Because life is always comfortable.
Well, and what is history if not a whole lot of uncomfortable truths about who we are as people and the shitty things we did? I mean, even in the Bible, you got a guy who's like, hey, let's just be nice to each other, and we nailed him to a stick. So humanity.
That's true, yeah.
It's a lot of issues to deal with here. So yeah, when I read about this story and read about this book being kind of the catalyst to this whole thing, I was immediately like, well, we should cover this on the podcast because this is exactly the kind of books I want to talk about. And whenever I can kind of tie them into something timely, I like to be able to do that.
Yeah.
And I will say that I'm not... I mean, it's an interesting title, but it feels like... And I mean, this is mostly joking, but like, those, I don't like books that put their thesis right in the title, right? It's like, would you rather read the Handmaid's Tale, or would you rather read this is a veiled warning of what happens when the what's it called, the men. The patriarchy.
Okay.
This is what happens when patriarchy and Christian values are out of control.
Yeah. I don't know. That would still, because it doesn't give you, that's not.
It doesn't give you all the details. It's still, this might be interesting, but yeah, it's, this book is very clear about what it is right up front.
Well, and it is an educational tool. Like, it's not a novel for people to read to get some entertainment value out of. Like, it is very much like there are the lessons at the end or activities at the end of each chapter to go through. So, I mean, yeah, I guess having it very just black and white. What the title is tells you exactly what it's going to be, and if you want to dive into that world and learn how to be anti-racist, then yeah, this is a great book for it.
Yeah. And I think, personally, I think anyone who sees a book that's called "This Book is Anti-Racist" should be like, hell yeah.
Yeah.
Let's find out how I can be more anti-racist. We should all be wanting to be more anti-racist.
I agree. And I had a conversation today on a different topic, or that stemmed from a different topic, but came to the same idea of people feeling that guilt when they come into this sort of topic. And it was really interesting because we were basically, this shouldn't be something like, yes, maybe you and I aren't intentionally being super racist to people. There are, as the book talks about, microaggressions and things like that maybe we're not aware of, but that's because that's the way we've just grown up in society, so we don't think of them that way. And this book, I haven't once thought to myself, holy, oh yeah, we can swear on this podcast, right? Holy shit, like I'm a horrible person. It's made me question some of the things that I've, said and done, thinking like, has this been offensive to somebody? Has this been racist towards somebody? Is what I'm doing? So it's definitely made me question that, but it hasn't come out from, the half of the book that I've read so far, hasn't made, like, it's not pointing a finger at white people saying you're all horrible.
Yeah.
It goes through some of the past and, this is how things came to be. But it also builds people up. She capitalizes all of the races, the pronouns for the races, so to give them importance. She calls them the global majority because that's the fact. Like, white people aren't the majority. It's just we've created a society where we feel we are. So she doesn't do anything that really points blame at current people in the cisgender male whatever people that seem to have power now. I haven't once felt that she's shaming anyone.
Yeah.
So I think so far she's done a really good job of educating. And yes, people should be reading a book like this and thinking to themselves, like, how has our society and how has all this stuff that's come to be, how has that affected my family? How have I contributed to maybe what's going on right now and how society is, and what can I do better? I think that's what should come out of this book, and not feeling, embarrassed or whatever the newspaper article said that kids are going to be feeling ashamed and whatever.
Yeah, I mean, the concern from according to the law is just a sec. The law is that kids can't or shouldn't feel discomfort, guilt, anguish, or any other form of psychological distress because of their race.
I think if anything, this book builds up people for whatever race they are.
Yeah. I know, I guess for myself, as I read through some of the stories, I did have moments of realizing that, not realizing, because I guess I probably always knew, but like just reinforcing the idea that I had a pretty cis white male, middle class, privileged upbringing that probably a lot of other people didn't.
And I felt that too, but it was never to the point of like, oh, I should feel bad about this. No. It just made me realize, like, wow, I have so much privilege with the life I've been given because of the color I am, and others don't. So it made me more aware of it. Not that I wasn't aware before, but that is at the most what I felt, was just more aware of the privilege that I have that others aren't, don't get in their life. Which isn't a bad thing. Like, I don't feel bad that the book made me think that way.
Yeah, no, exactly.
Right?
Exactly. I think, being reminded of those sorts of things is important. Let's get into the actual book itself. So it is broken up into sort of four parts. We're covering the first two parts this episode. That's part 1, waking up, understanding and growing into my identities. And part 2, opening the window, making sense of the world. And this is all pretty much just kind of, part 1 is kind of a look at the different terms that they're going to be using throughout the book?
Yes.
You looked like you were looking for
Sorry,
something.
I was looking at, as you were talking, I was looking at the foam on the wall to make sure it was level. Sorry.
Oh.
I'm still listening to you.
No, it's so not that you needed me to like, I just thought that you had lost something. Okay.
No.
All right. So chapter 1, who am I? They talk about the dominant culture versus the subordinate culture in a society. I mean, I feel definitely that I'm part of the dominant culture as a cis white male.
Oh yeah, like I don't know how. So here's my thing. Another thing that came up in my conversation earlier today was people look at their individuality when they approach these, racial issues and think like, oh, I'm not, I have all sorts of friends and I'm not racist and whatever. It's like, okay, sure, maybe you aren't to the extent where it's overtly racist, but at the same time, you got to look at the bigger picture. So as, some white cis males may have a shitty upbringing, individually, but as a collective, white men have done pretty well in getting whatever they wanted in life. And so, when people are like, oh, I'm not this, I'm not that. Sure, maybe you aren't, but collectively, yes, we have contributed to this, the way society has been shaped now. So that was just something that came up that I was like, you know what, we really need to be aware of. It's not the individual person. Yes, there are individual people who are racist and whatever, but it's more of the collective that is affected, and the ones that are, putting these societal norms in place and creating them. It's not one individual, it's everyone. So yeah, I feel like when she's talking about a lot of this stuff, that was something that I was thinking, it's like, okay, yes, I've been a nice person, I've been this, I've been that, but it's all of us as a cis white male group that have added to this and kept it going.
I think that's also similar to when you talk about, the ideas of white privilege and you have somebody who's like, well, I've worked really hard my entire life. I don't feel like I have any privilege. And it's like, it's not saying that, there's this concept of white privilege doesn't mean that every cis white person is living in a McMansion somewhere and kicking their feet up and having a great time. It just means that compared to other races, you had a step up. Lots of white people living, at or below the poverty line. Lots, probably even some that, were at a level similar to the, non-white cis people. But just generally speaking, as a race, we have had to step up because we've been exploiting. When I say we, again, it's not you and I, it's culturally.
Yeah.
But exploiting these other races for our benefit.
Yeah, I'm always reminded of that. There's this one video of a class where they're running across a field. Do you know what I'm talking about? And the teacher, starts giving out like the directions of, okay, well, if you are, I don't know what he says, but it's like, if you're white, take a step forward. If you live in this neighborhood, take a step forward. I don't know, whatever he says. And it ends up being like, you've got the white cis individuals that are like halfway up the field because they had all these privileges awarded to them along the way. And you've got these minority groups that are at the back. And then when he's like, okay, we're going to race to the end now, you can see clearly just from that video of like how unfair it is for some of these kids who really haven't done anything other than being born in the race that they are.
But I mean, the other part of that too is that at the end of that race, everybody ran, right? Some had to run harder than others, right? So even there, this idea that like, there's the whites there had the privilege of being closer to the finish line, but they still had to run. And so, when we say there's white privilege, again, it doesn't mean that everybody has $100,000 in the bank and blah, 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 blah. It just means that there was a step up compared to other people. But yeah, another thing that came up in that first chapter was the idea that the dominant culture isn't always the majority, which is an interesting thing to think about, because we do frame it as majority,
Mm-hmm.
these are the minorities over here, even though they've taken to using the phrase global majority, which is one I'd not heard before, but I think is really, it's
Mm-hmm.
really interesting. And it's a good reminder of the fact that, we've built these societies where, the cis white middle-class people are the dominant culture,
Yeah.
but may not be the majority.
Yeah.
Right. And also, when you take all the minorities and add them together, they become a pretty big majority in and of themselves.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like when you look at voting turnout numbers, like it's almost like if you had like everyone who didn't vote went and voted for the same candidate, that candidate would absolutely win, because there's like, it's something like, maybe 51% sometimes of people who didn't vote. The majority of people didn't even go to the polls.
Yeah, and well, and it's pretty crazy right now in the States. They're trying to pass all these laws to limit the quote unquote minorities from even getting to the polling stations. So like you can even see it now, how the system that we have in place is making it a lot harder for these people to even get a fair chance at anything. Yeah, it's just crazy. One thing that I have at the top of my notes that I thought was interesting, just kind of on a side tangent. So when she refers to folks, which she says a lot, FOLX, which I didn't even realize was a gendered term. I thought folks was just like everyone. But yeah, so she, instead of FOLKS, it's FOLX. And I guess that's a thing. You learn something new every day.
I don't personally think that folks is particularly gendered.
I didn't either, but I guess whatever, it's not hurting me, and if they want to call it that, fine. Exactly. All right.
Which I have seen that sort of X used in other places to like Latinx.
And I understand it in that sense, where there is either an O or an A, right? So the word itself in the language, like with Italian, if it ends in an O, it's masculine. If it ends in an A, it's feminine. So, and I'm assuming it's the same with Spanish. I can see it and understand it in that sense, but when it ends in a KS, I don't know, I just assumed it would be for everyone, but all right.
I just think it's convenient that the KS and the X make pretty much the same sound.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
You still pronounce it the same way.
You
You say it in the back of your mind, you do the X, but then nobody even knows that you're doing the X. Right?
Probably makes it easier for people who don't speak English as a first language to spell it.
Well, the L is still pretty weird.
Yeah, that's true, yeah.
It's even weirder, actually, but it's got to be there. Otherwise, it's Fox.
Yeah.
In chapter 2, there's a discussion of what social identities are. And that's, I guess, sort of, who you are in the greater social context. So, like, whether you're Christian or an atheist, whether, what your job is, and, what...
Is this the one where at the end the activity was like, I am, and then say what, kind of list off your terms or whatever?
There's a lot of those throughout these. I think like the first 3 chapters were all sort of extensions of
like, who are you? Yeah, what makes you you?
Yeah.
And going back to like the individual level of things, it's like we should be proud of what we've achieved in life. Even as a cis, male, cis white male, we should be proud of the things that we've achieved, but also recognize that we achieved them with the help of being. The race that we are and where we were born. And yeah, we need to do something to try and help everyone to be able to have the same privileges that we have. And it's going to be a huge societal change. And something else that came up in conversation today was, and I think it was touched on in the book, was that in order for that change to happen, it would require that the current majority would have to give up some of their privileges. I don't see that as a bad thing.
Mm-hmm.
But again, that goes back to you have to think at a more global scale and less of an individual scale. Because, yeah, you could look at somebody who's down on their luck and, hasn't really had the same privilege. Well, they've had the same privileges, but they haven't been doing so well in life, and they feel like that they haven't had the privileges. And so, yeah, to them, they aren't going to want to give up anything. But I don't think it's really... They're not the ones that are going to be making those changes. I think it's, the higher level, government and businesses and all those corporations that end up pushing down their, the laws and the rules and all those societal norms. I think they're the ones that have to make the big change. And sure, you might have people that are going to argue and grumble, but at the end of the day, I mean... I think it's what needs to be done.
That sounds suspiciously like socialism, man.
Oh, man.
Chapter 3, what is race and what is ethnicity? Well, it seems like this book is defining race as basically the color of your skin.
Mm-hmm.
And ethnicity is your cultural identity and kind of your history. So I would be white as a race, and my ethnicity would be like Irish, England, European kind of guy.
Yeah, so I'm white as well. In the book, she talks about we don't use Caucasian anymore.
Yeah.
Yeah. Anyways, I'm white, and I'm Italian, 100% Italian. I didn't come from Italy, but my parents did. So
you're not really 100%. I mean,
okay,
you're 100% Italian.
Sorry,
from an ethnicity perspective.
And
but
I
don't think like the Italian Business Bureau would approve of a 100% Italian label for you.
But he was born in Canada.
Yeah, he was born in Canada.
But it's interesting saying I'm Canadian, because what is Canadian? Canadian is just, it's a bunch of races that have come together, a bunch of different ethnicities that came to Canada. Like, there is no, I don't know, I guess if you were 100% Canadian, technically you would be an Indigenous person, because they're the first ones here. So I don't know, I'm Italian. I don't have any other ethnicities in there, but I was born in Canada.
There was a quote in this chapter that I really liked from I'm going to screw this name up. Ta-Nehisi Coates from Between the World and Me. The quote is, "But race is the child of racism, not the father." And that struck me as like a really, really different and important way of looking at race and racism. That the idea that like racism comes about as a result of race means that you're starting with dividing people based on the color of their skin, which is not something that you even need to do.
Yeah.
Right? There's no reason to do that. We're all the same species, right? We're all the same race.
Yeah.
The human race.
Well, and that's something else that she touches on. It's funny, I have that same quote noted in my notes here. But she does touch on that specific thing of, we've divided people up because for whatever reason, humans need to categorize things, and it's not even based on science, really. Like, we're all humans. The only thing is the pigmentation of our skin, and that's the level of, what is it, melanin? Yeah. So yeah, it is very interesting that we've divided ourselves up, which, yeah, that's where the racism starts, is by already saying you're different.
To divide.
Yeah.
Yeah. Chapter 4. What is racism? Personal. What is racism?
I think I've grabbed this note from the book. Racism is personal prejudice and bias.
And those are all, the personal levels of racism where that's, crossing the street because you see a group of black kids walking on the sidewalk, or it's the security guard who, is watching the black kid or the First Nations person, assuming that they're going to, rob the store.
place.
Maybe the way to do it though is to like go on a team with a a different race, and like the white guy does the stealing while the black kid distracts the guard. Like get all the guards looking at the black kids, and then steal all the stuff.
I think that's happened before.
Probably has, yeah.
I think so. It's really interesting to me. So being just a male, not even a white male, but just being a male, I have female friends. I know you'd be shocked to learn that, but in talking to them, I've realized that if there is a female walking down the road, I should cross onto the other side to not, give them fear that I'm one of the crazy males. And so when she said that line about, racism is crossing the street when whatever you see a minority, I was like, oh, but what if it is a black woman and I don't want to be like, I don't know. I was just having that internal debate. Like, I don't
turn around and walk the other way.
Yeah,
I don't know.
like
kill a cab or something.
Yeah,
I thought about that exact same thing, right?
Yeah.
I read recently that if you're walking down the street behind a woman, cross the street so that she doesn't feel uncomfortable.
I don't want her to think I'm racist. I just want her to be like,
exactly.
oh, he's not a rapist. Okay, that's okay. But I mean, I guess I would rather her think that
stay on the sidewalk, you're a rapist. You cross the street, you're a racist.
Yeah.
You spell it almost the same way. You just swap out a letter.
But I guess she would feel more safe if I was across the street, so she can think I'm a racist all she wants, as long as she feels safe. That's, I guess, the moral of that story.
That's right. And then chapter 5, what is racism? Institutional. So that's businesses, housing, government, education. Businesses not hiring people because of their names,
not promoting because of race and all that.
And a lot of it has been so voting lines in the US is all
all that gerrymandering.
It's all very built around race and stuff, and even though they're still trying to change those things, a lot of those are already in place. And so that's, institutional racism that has been there for a while that now needs to be worked to get past. And that's where we're at with a lot of these things, is that it is, or it's cases where I think there was, maybe this was this chapter, or maybe it was a different one where they talk about these 3 slaves, these 2 or these 3, maybe they weren't slaves at the time. I can't remember what they were called, but basically 2 white guys and a black guy. And they escaped from where they were working, and they got caught, and they went to trial, and the white guys got whatever their sentence was, but the black guy was sentenced to servitude for life to the guy. And so his sentence was different because he was seen as less than the white people. And again, that's an example of, institutional racism in the laws of the country. So,
and you can look at the incarceration rate of black men in the States, and I don't know how you can argue that when you look at the stats of crimes being committed, black men aren't doing more of the crimes. They're just being sentenced more and harsher sentences than their white counterparts.
Exactly. I've seen so many news stories where they're comparing these two different criminals, one white, one black. They've both basically committed the same crime, but it's the white guy's getting 18-month suspended sentence. The black guy's going to jail for 20 years.
Yeah.
And sometimes, that sounds ridiculous, but I feel like sometimes it is that extreme a difference where based on the color of your skin, you are getting the severest possible penalty.
Yeah.
It's insane.
And then even if you were at the point where we got it to okay, fine, they're sentencing the people adequately across the board, you still have to look at okay, maybe that white person has the privilege of getting bail because they can afford it, whereas the black person or the person of minority race doesn't have those funds to access. And so it's even at that level, it's
being
ridiculous.
Able to afford a lawyer versus having to take the one that's appointed to you.
Yeah. It's just, I find it hard for people to ever argue that, racism doesn't exist now. No, it's systemically rooted in our life. It's all around us.
Yeah, it's the same thing with like stats of black kids being shot by police. Through the roof compared to white people being shot by police. I mean, it's actually like the numbers they're not that far apart. But when you consider the fact that like there's like 1/5 or whatever the number of black people compared to white people, they should be much smaller than they are, right?
I think it comes up later in the book, but since we're talking about like shootings, she does mention that story of what is it, Zimmerman and
Trayvon Martin.
Yeah, Trayvon Martin, and how I think it was Florida, or I don't know if it's all the states, has that stand your ground thing, and he ended up just getting off because he was standing his ground, even though he was in his vehicle. Trayvon was walking. He was a kid with a candy bar.
Yeah. I don't know how you can plead self-defense when
you have a vehicle, just drive.
Well, when the other person didn't even have a weapon.
Even if you felt threatened that and let's say Trayvon was like a 7-foot giant that could totally kick your ass with his fists, you're in a fucking vehicle. Just keep driving. You didn't have to stop.
Yeah.
If you felt threatened, drive away. Don't like pulling out your gun. I don't know, but that's even if Trayvon was huge. He was like a 14-year-old kid going to his dad's house after buying some candy. Like, I don't know. That whole thing was bullshit. The judge is obviously like racist, and I don't know. It really frustrated me reading that part of the book. But I think that was later on.
I mean, all those stories are pretty sad.
Yeah.
This takes us to part 2, opening the window, making sense of the world. And chapter 6, prejudice is personal. This is where we had that fun story about the author talking about the student in her class.
Oh, yeah.
Who was basically bullied by the teacher because they wanted to go to the bathroom.
Yeah, and then was basically got in trouble because
they peed themselves.
Peed himself in class because...
Was denied the opportunity to go to the bathroom and then peed himself and then got in trouble for that. So... yeah. No winning with that teacher.
It was... That's
not a teacher is going to have... This book is anti-racist in their classroom, I think.
No, I don't even think they would have a second thought of like, should I bring this book to my class? Oh. No.
They talk about how prejudice is the personal side of racism. It's an attitude toward an individual or group based on the social group they belong to. Or the racial group, I guess, they belong to. So yeah, it's like, I don't like you because you're black, or I don't like you because you're...
Different.
Yeah. You have a weird face.
I got a note here, which I didn't even realize this, but in the book she says students can be arrested for disorderly conduct, which can be anything from repeatedly speaking out in class and not handing in your phone to getting into physical fights with other students, or anything that can disrupt the normal teaching day. Teachers can call the police for disorderly conduct of a student and have them arrested. And this seems to be happening. I mean, if she wrote about it, obviously it's a thing that's going on. Are you looking up that part?
No, it reminded me of a story that I read recently that I wanted to see if I could find about a bunch of black kids that were arrested for pretty much nothing.
But like I just remember days when I was in school, and I would do stupid things in class, and it would be, laughed off, or the teacher would basically send me to the principal's office, whatever, or send me outside the classroom, and that was the end of it. But kids are being arrested, and they have a criminal record before they even get out of school because of this racist society that we've got, and these laws that are set up to basically make them fail.
Yeah. Tennessee County reportedly illegally jailed hundreds of children, charging some with crimes that don't exist. This is from Forbes. For years, the suburban county near Nashville, Tennessee illegally locked up children and in at least one instance used bogus charges to justify it, according to a bombshell ProPublica investigation published Friday as part of a system that sent kids as young as 7 to jail. Rutherford County, Tennessee, used what county officials called a filter system starting in 2008, which left it up to the discretion of I did read about this, of jailers to decide whether a child arrested and taken into the juvenile detention center should be released through Tennessee law only, though Tennessee law only allows for children to be held under specific circumstances. But they basically circumvented those circumstances and jailed kids anyway.
What the hell?
Yeah.
And so then after they were released, was it like, okay, this was a lesson for you, don't do drugs? Or was it just like, okay, fine, you can leave now. Don't do this imaginary crime ever again?
So this is one of them here. For allegedly watching a scuffle involving a 5-year-old, a 6-year-old, and one older boy, the children were charged with criminal responsibility for conduct of another, a crime that does not exist in Tennessee law. This all led to a class action lawsuit against Rutherford County, which was settled in 2017, when the county agreed to pay out a combined $397,500 to the 11 children, while a separate class action lawsuit ended the county's filter system. But yeah, that's insane. Like,
that is just fucked up.
48%. That's the percentage of children who were jailed in the county after cases were referred to juvenile court in 2014. The most recent year data is available. That number was by far the most of any county in Tennessee and was a rate nearly 10 times above the state average of 5%.
Wow.
So, anyway, institutional racism.
Yeah, it's ridiculous.
Chapter 7, the history that we carry. So this is where they talk about how, the history goes back far beyond our own history. And it's sort of the history of our family, the history of our race. But it was interesting that the way she described it, it includes the things that we know, but also the things that we don't know. Mm-hmm. Right? Like, she talked about how she doesn't know where Jewel, her last name, originates. And I think that's an interesting distinction too, in that, the gaps that we have in our history or in our knowledge of who we are, those gaps still inform who we are. It could maybe make us feel shame about something because maybe you don't know who your dad is, right?
Yeah.
That's part of your history.
That's true.
Obviously there is an actual part of history that involves your dad and his family. But the absence of your dad in your life is also a part of your history. So I thought it was interesting that, like, the things that we don't know can also have an important aspect on who we are and our history. And then they talk a lot about colonization, which is something that I think just about every country that has been colonized has to kind of figure out how to address moving forward. And I think this is where, she was talking about how if we ever wanted to try to right these wrongs or balance things out, there are people who have things now that would have to lose those things. And, because as I said, like if you're not a native to the country that you're in, like an original native to the country you're in, you're on land that was stolen.
Yeah.
I'd have to go back to Ireland. There's not much room there.
Yeah.
It's pretty small. And so, like colonization is a huge part of everyone's history. And it's something that is either not talked about, or I think it's not talked about enough look at what really happened.
Yeah, I think that's key, because I remember in school, yes, we learned about colonization, but it was, I think, with a rose-colored lens of, the indigenous people were brought to, a school where they learned the ways of, whatever, the European, And so it was kind of with that lens of like, oh yeah, we gave them an education where they didn't have one before. We gave them food and all that stuff. And not you skip over the part of like, yes, the children were ripped apart from their family. They were housed in, shitty dorm rooms, whatever, and starved and tortured and molested and all those things. Like, yeah, we left that part out of the education side of things because that would make people feel uncomfortable, I guess. But that's the truth. And yeah, there was a note.
Or the first Thanksgiving story about how
we all sat at a table and we traded whatever blankets and everything.
And before you leave, take one of these handy smallpox blankets.
Yeah.
Bye.
So yeah, like they leave that part out of it, and that's the way it was taught. Was like, oh yeah, we came here, we gave them a better way of life, just because the way of their life was different than the colonizers.
Yeah.
But yeah, there's a note here that in the book that she has of. In 1978, Native American families were finally granted the right to choose the type of education their children received and were able to keep them on the reservation and with their families. 1978 wasn't that long ago. And I was just trying to find out when, and that's in the States. And I think in Canada, it was even later than that.
I want to say like 19...
I think it was 96 that the last residential school closed.
That might be it.
I don't think they were doing as harsh of things in 96, but still, for a residential school to be open in 96.
97.
Was it 97? Oh, yeah. So.
Last federally funded residential school, Kivalliq Hall in Rankin Inlet, closed in 1997.
Yeah. So when we think of these things being something in the past, it's not that far in the past. Like, we're still infants in this whole, truth and reconciliation thing.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Where are we? Chapter 8. Knowing our history. And this is where they get into the residential schools.
Mm-hmm. Sorry, I didn't have chapter notes. I just kind of wrote all along.
It probably makes more sense to just sort of talk about it in general because the chapters are all they all melt together.
Yeah. No real sequential order to them.
But yes, residential schools, and then she talks about the integration of schools in the U.S. And I've heard about those stories before, but something about there's a section in the book that had a bunch of these pictures from the past.
Yeah.
And I just found myself in looking at these pictures, trying to imagine, it's easy to look back and say, be like, wow, what a victory it was to finally get racial integration in the schools. Do you imagine, though, being a third grade student who's black and having to go into that classroom for the first time into an integrated class where odds are teachers don't want to teach you.
Yeah, you're not very welcome.
You're not welcome. Yeah. I mean, in some of these students, which is not something I've heard about, in some of these schools, the white students just didn't go anymore. Parents pulled them out of school. We're like, we're not going to send them there with you dirty black kids.
Well, there's the picture in the book. Right. It was in 1964. There was a white boycott that, and there's in the picture, you can see 5 black children with a bunch of empty desks in the classroom, and there's a teacher that looks bored as hell and not impressed that she has to be there.
But how terrifying for those students that who are 8 years old.
Children.
8 years old.
They don't know what the fuck's going on. They're innocent at this point.
And then there's the stat in this chapter that black folks are 8 times more likely to be stopped by the police, which is it's just the fact of the world, I guess. Yeah. And then chapter 9, We Are Our History.
We haven't read that one yet.
That I think came from I don't think it came from the book. Maybe it was my interpretation of the chapter.
I thought this was where we were stopping.
To the end of chapter 9.
Oh, shit. I thought you said the beginning. Because that's 83 pages. That's halfway through the book.
Okay.
That's 160.
I did say
Sorry.
Okay.
Okay, we can do chapter 9.
Yeah, no,
you can educate me.
Just because it's a break between part 2 and part 3.
Oh, sorry.
So
okay.
I try to do about halfway.
Okay.
But I also I would rather break like after a chapter or after a part. So that's all.
Oh, okay. All right. Sorry.
but-
I'm a chapter behind then.
But I don't have very good notes here anyway. It's like our history is made up of people, racists and anti-racists. Yep. And
That's
if they
the
ever
world,
collide,
yeah.
They'll both explode. As much as our history involves racist acts and groups, it also includes anti-racist acts and groups as well. Isn't that thoughtful? I don't know what that really says about the chapter as a whole, but I think the last thing that they wanted you to think about on that chapter was like, what have you done to help anti-racism lately? What have you done lately to be anti-racist?
Well, I'm just skimming through. So I have the PDF book here that I'm looking at, and it's interesting. I'm not sure of the full context of it, but as you say that, the quote is, "We are the ones we have been waiting for," and it's a quote by June Jordan, and I feel like that is a really good way of basically saying, like, we're the ones that can make a change.
Yeah, exactly.
Like, we need to do the work.
Yep.
Starting now. We can't pass it on to our kids. We can't use the excuse of, I'm not racist, so whatever. Like, no. Maybe you don't think you're racist, but we need to actively figure out how we can change the system, which is working against the global majority.
And this is why the anti-racist thing matters, because I think the argument is that it's not enough to just be not racist.
Yeah.
It's time to start pushing back against racism, both personal and institutional, and systematic, and trying to just make the world better for everybody. Although it's important to remember that according to the dude in The Handmaid's Tale, when you make the world better for some, it does not get better for everybody.
Yeah, I could see that. Well, that goes again to some people are going to have to give up privileges for others to gain them.
Yep.
And so I think when we talk about equality and building everyone up, there is going to be, like, you only have, let's say, 10 privilege points to give to everyone, and right now 9 of them are given to white people. And so, yeah, maybe we need to all be down to 1 privilege point each, right? Like, you have to spread it across the board. So sure, we may not all get the privileges that we would like to have, but we all have to look at it as a global lens of everyone deserves a good life. And if that means that we all have to be at the same level and all have to only have a certain amount of privileges, then yeah, maybe that's the way it is. Maybe we all can't be billionaires, but we can all be thousandaires or whatever, right?
The problem tends to be, though, I think, that most of the people who have the privilege also don't want to give up the privilege, and also are the ones in the position to decide where the privilege goes.
Yeah.
So it does get stuck in this permanent sort of imbalance.
Yeah.
And what do you do when it seems like as soon as, I shouldn't say that that's necessarily the case, but like so often you have these people who are like, oh, I'm going to fight for your right to do things. Then they get up there and they become sellouts.
Yeah.
Because all of a sudden they're getting all this money from Big Pharma and from gun lobbies and whatever else. And
or they even, before that, they just like, oh, I'm going to fight for your rights until it kind of encroaches on something, that a privilege that they have that they don't want to lose or something, and then it's like, oh, I'll just sit this one out, but I support you, keep fighting for your rights, right. And yeah, like it is this
one's not my fight, guys, but rah rah,
keep going, I believe in you. It's one of those things that those in power are going to have to make a shift and realize that they're going to have to give up some of that power. Now, it doesn't mean that they have to live shitty lives. I think everyone could have a really good life. But it also probably means that you're not going to have a lot of Jeff Bezos of the world who are billionaires. And
I think, though, I mean, we're at a point in history where if we handled it right, we could make sure that everyone in at least North America, and probably around the world, but let's just say North America, lives probably a better life than anyone else in North America ever has up till now, right? If we were to, increase taxes on the Bezoses and the Gates and the Elon Musks and all of that, and then did a proper distribution of wealth, we would absolutely be looking at lifestyles that are the best that this North America has ever seen.
But in doing that, we also have to shift our mentality on what a good lifestyle is. Like, I don't think we should be looking at the celebrity lifestyle of, spending and partying and,
exactly. That's
champagne and all that. It should just be like, okay, I can pay my bills. I can do a job that I enjoy doing and, continue to make money. And I don't ever have to worry about, the banks coming after me to, foreclose on my house.
Yeah.
I think that's the thing, is that Hollywood has done a great job of showing us a lifestyle that is, flamboyant and extravagant and wanting us to achieve that, when it's like, no, that's not a realistic lifestyle. And I don't really want that lifestyle.
Yeah.
I just don't want to have to live paycheck to paycheck, right? And pay my bills, right?
But there's a lot of people who do want that lifestyle.
Yeah.
And they've been fooled into thinking that they could get
that's happiness. Well, oh yeah. And that's happiness.
And that's happiness. Yeah, for sure. But I mean, that goes back to, I remember watching Lifestyles of the Rich and Famous in the 80s and being like, this is a fucking appalling show. But anyway.
Neither here nor there.
Neither here nor there. Yeah. And that was the first half of this book, is Anti-Racist. I'm not going to give a judgment on the book yet, because there's a whole other half. And maybe that's where the parts that are offensive to this woman's morals and faith will crop up, is in the second half. Yeah,
I mean, she hasn't really mentioned faith at all anywhere. And this goes back to the question of what religion is she a part of that doesn't think that the things in this book are good? I don't know. I was, raised Catholic, and everything she's said so far about, we need to treat people equally and all that, that's part of religion. I don't know.
I could have tried harder probably, but I tried to find a better example of what it was that this mother was so offended by, or to find links to, because apparently she posted on her social media about it, and I couldn't find links to that either. But
I have a feeling it's probably because the author is a biracial black woman, and she just doesn't want that stuff in her kid's life.
Well, I said, I happen to think it's the desire to look back on your family's place in the history of racism, and to question what you can do and should do in the future. And a lot of people just like to maintain the ignorance of, well, I didn't do anything directly to black people, so I'm not racist. I don't know why you're complaining to me.
Yeah.
Right. So it's just people who don't want to do the examining themselves, because, most students in the fourth grade aren't probably going to sit down and do this workbook in a vacuum, right? It's a conversation that they'll have with their parents. They'll be like, hey, Mom, I've got this book and I'm working on this thing. And what can you tell me about the history of my family in this context? And pretty soon, that's where the parents no.
Yeah, I could see it being more uncomfortable for the parent than it would be for the child.
Exactly. And at no point has this been framed as the child came to her and said, oh, I'm uncomfortable with this book that I chose to bring home and could just return and not read if I didn't want to.
Yeah.
But no, it's the mother who's all offended by her, about her morals and faith or whatever. So anyway. Thanks for agreeing to do this book in such a, like, it was a pretty quick turnaround. Like, I stumbled upon this story last week and I was like, hey, want to do this like next week? And then I didn't even read the book until like 2 days ago because I was going to get it on Saturday. And I was like, oh, it's like the library closes in half an hour and I really don't want to go to the downtown right now. And then, no, I was going to do it Friday. And then I was going to get it on Saturday before I drove out of town somewhere for a thing. And then I forgot about that. And I was just leaving to the thing. And I was like, oh man, I don't have enough time to get the book, which means I couldn't get it on Sunday because it was closed. And Monday was the holiday. So I had to wait till Tuesday to get it. And then I had to like read half the book in 2 days. So
I ended up, I called the library because you had mentioned there was one at either of the libraries in town. And I called the downtown one and they're like, no, we don't have one here. I called the North Shore one and they're like, no, we don't have one here. And I was like, well, can you check the downtown? And they're like, yep, I'll do that. Like, oh no, they don't have one either. And I was like, oh shit, I fucked up. So I was Googling on like where I could find a PDF of the book or something.
The North Shore Library?
I don't know. It was like Tuesday, I guess.
You must have just snagged it.
Probably, yeah. So, but they didn't have one. So now I just got an email today because I put one on hold, but I was like, I'm probably not going to get it in time to read it. But I got the email today saying there is one that I can go pick up. So I think for the second half, I'll actually read the book, book rather than the PDF.
Because I searched on Friday. I went to the library website and I did a search, and you can actually, it'll break down which libraries in.
Yeah, and I saw, it didn't have Kamloops, yet it said Kamloops had one. Mm-hmm. Like, it was weird. In the general thing, it was like Kamloops has one, but then you click like the plus, and it's like lists every other TNRD library, but not a Kamloops one. So I was like, I don't get it. So yeah,
when I looked, it had both Kamloops and Kamloops North. I got it from Kamloops North. Although when I was in the Kamloops North getting it, I Googled it again there because I couldn't remember what the number on it was to find the right aisle. And at that point, the one for downtown, it was in transit.
Oh, okay, yeah. It seems like a popular book because they have 10 copies within the TNRD, she was saying, and they were all like checked out. Yeah. And one was in transit, which is the one that I've got on hold right now. So yeah, like it makes me feel good that there are, 10 of them that are being read. And have holds on them. So
well, and
in Canada, anyways,
this controversy will get this book into more people's minds and maybe, encourage more students who aren't in Southlake, Texas, to go seeking this book in their libraries and, doing the workbooks and, learning what they can about personal and institutional racism.
Yeah, I'd like to see something within our lifetime that more people have more privileges, but it's really going to take those shitty parents to step up.
Chill the fuck out.
Yeah, they need to just let their children learn things and acknowledge the uncomfortable pasts that we all have from our ancestors, and just acknowledging that, maybe I'm not a shitty person, but people before me were, and I need to be part of the solution.
Yeah. Remember, kids, you could be the generation that you've been waiting for.
And so can we, Todd.
So can we.
Don't leave it up to your kids.
We all. That's right. Yes. Well, no, but I was directing that to kids of parents who aren't going to help.
Okay, all right.
Don't learn from your parents. You can stand up and be the good guys, even if your parents don't want to do that.
Yes.
And if your parents do want to do that, then that's even better. That's like you got more power.
Yeah. Then you have a lot more support.
Yeah.
But yeah, that was part one. So far, I'm really enjoying this book, and I'm happy that you have asked me to, guest host on this book because, it's just given me a lot to reflect on.
Yeah, I find that too. It's a different sort of book than one that we've done before because this isn't really a novel. It's not really telling a story. It's more a reflection on, it's asking us to reflect on ourselves while the author reflects on herself and while also reflecting on sort of history. But, I think all of her anecdotes and the how personal she makes everything does invite us as readers to investigate ourselves. Her openness inspires a certain openness in ourselves as we look at ourselves, and
Yeah.
yeah. So anyway, that was the first half of This Book is Anti-Racist. Thank you for listening. This has been When Bad Things Happen to Good People. As always, if you want to support us or check out our social media, you can find links to all that at our website at blahblahblahmedia.com. That's BLAHBLAHBLAH media.com. There's a Patreon there that you can sign up for monthly support, or you can do a Buy Me a Coffee, which will probably go towards beer, but we'll see, given the day. Any final thoughts before we go?
I'm looking forward to reading the second half of this book.
Cool. Oh, is there anything you want to plug?
Our other podcasts?
Yeah, let's do that.
Yeah. So, normally I am on Half Cut Conspiracies with Todd, and that one is basically us just having some drinks and talking about some random conspiracies that have infiltrated modern society.
Looser, less serious.
Yeah, we like to laugh and have a good time and joke around on that one. We are, in the name, Half Cut. So it's a good time.
We just talked about the death of Tupac Shakur, right?
Yeah, that was an interesting one for me, and I think you learned a lot.
I did learn a lot, believe it or not. As a super white guy, I don't have a big history with like rap music. So
I mean, I'm not any less white.
There is you must be a little bit less white than me.
I just used to listen to it growing up because my brother was older.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. But that was a fun one. So if you're interested in conspiracies and just random funny drunk guys talking, then check out Half Cut Conspiracies.
All right. Then until next time, this would be a good time to go read a fucking book.